Hi, I'm Marcus Ansems. I'm a master of wine. Today I thought we might build the ultimate case of wine. 12 different varieties and styles. It won't break the bank. And like me, it's only going to get better with age. I'm really lucky with my work life because I get to split my time between being a winemaker, a grape grower, a consultant, sheep herder, even a wine buyer. On the wine buying side, I often get asked questions about cellaring, what wines age well, what wines don't. And I think a lot of people just don't really know where to start when it comes to building a cellar. So if that sounds like you, here's the perfect opportunity to give it a go. I have to admit, over COVID, my own cellar took a little bit of a hit, and I know I'm not alone on that one. So I thought it might be fun to build a great case of wine. I'm going to put it in my own cellar. Hopefully a few of you will do the same, and maybe we can see how it ages together. I'm not affiliated with any of the producers or the wines that I might recommend in the video. I just think that they're making great products, great prices. They're available in my market, which is Canada. They're available fairly broadly internationally, so wherever you may be. And I think they're all going to improve with cellaring. So let's get into it. Cellaring is a big subject, so I'll try not to get into the weeds too much. But I guess the question that we're asking is, what are some attributes that make one wine age well versus another? And it's a complicated question with equally complicated answer. But what we know is that wines tend to have attributes or combinations of attributes that are reasonably predictable when it comes to ageability. And I'd say the top 10 common features of ageable wines or cellarable wines would be, number one would be high alcohol. So examples would include things like Barossa Valley Shiraz or vintage port from Portugal. Second thing would be high acidity. So that would be something like Mosel Riesling from Germany, for example, or vintage Champagne from France. Number three would be high levels of tannin. So that would be Nebbiolo, say, from Barolo, or Cabernet Sauvignon from Bordeaux. Fourth thing is high residual sugar. So that can be in wines like Tokai from Hungary or, say, Sauterne from France. The fifth thing is that they're often barrel aged. So Rioja Tempranillo, for example, or say Chianti or Brunello Sangiovese. They tend to come from famous regions. And this is because a region often becomes famous when it does well on the secondary market, which is really a function of how well it ages or how well it cellars. The seventh thing is wines tend to come from marginal climates, so where they can often retain their acidity well, so that'd be something like Burgundy, for example. The eighth thing is they tend to be top producers, and top producers really look after their wines and really protect them against oxidation, which is a death sentence for aging. The next thing is that they come from good vintages. So good vintages tend to produce a good balance between that acidity and tannin and alcohol and flavour, and give you enough stuffing to allow it to age. The final thing would be ageable wines tend to be bottled wines, so they don't come in bag in a box or some of those formats which are really not designed to be cellared. Ageable wines tend to have very high quality corks or cork alternatives, such as screw caps, and they are designed for aging. So the first wine I've decided to include in our case is Riesling. Rieslings tend to have high acidity. They're often complemented by some residual sugar. Some options I like would be the Clare and Eden Valleys in South Australia.
This bloke's a bit biased, isn't he? Indeed.
I also think Riesling from Marlborough is really underrated. Wachau and Campbell in Austria produce some really superb ageable Rieslings.
Did you just say Australia?
I also actually like the Rieslings from the Okanagan and Niagara areas in Canada, but they're not widely distributed, so I won't include them here. But ultimately, I think for this case, I'm going to go for a German Riesling. I like Rheingau, but I think the unique qualities of Mosel are what we want for some long-lived Riesling. Mosel's a very marginal climate. It's got steep slopes. Riesling struggles to get ripe, but when it does, there's high levels of flavour. It tends to produce fairly low alcohol, high acidity, and that's often balanced by a little bit of residual sugar. So ultimately, the wine I chose was the Selbach Oster Zeltlinger Schlossberg Riesling Spätlese from the 2018 vintage. This retails in Canada for around $45, something like that. I think US it's around that 35 mark. It's a little bit pricey, you know, for Riesling, but for Mosel it's pretty good. Selbach Oster actually also produces a dry style, a Trocken style, which is their entry level, and that's also excellent. That retails for around 35 Canadian, about 25 US. So that might be another option for you as well. So the next one we've got in our case is Semillon. This is an interesting variety. It tends to have large berries, pretty big bunches. The wines and juices are actually quite neutral in their youth. They're vaguely herbal, somewhat reminiscent of Sauvignon Blanc, but a little bit less intensity. But over time, they blossom into these wonderful honeyed, complex wines. Some of the best examples come from Bordeaux, where they're often blended with Sauvignon Blanc and barrel-aged.
About time!
This style is also excellent in Napa in California and Margaret River in Western Australia. But the region and style ultimately that I chose was straight varietal Semillon from Hunter Valley in Australia, in New South Wales.
Biased. I believe you may be right.
This wine is picked at relatively low levels of sugar to retain its acidity. It's fermented in stainless steel and it's bottled young. These wines tend to be quite neutral in their youth, but when you give them 5 or 6 years of age, they just blossom into these beautiful, rich, honeyed, complex wines that age beautifully. The wines example that I chose was the Tyrrell's HVD Vineyard, Hunter Valley Semillon. This is a bit of a pricey example. Comes in around $50 Canadian, but it should age beautifully. Another good option would be the Mount Pleasant Elizabeth Semillon from Hunter Valley, and that comes in at around $25 Canadian. For whatever reason, I couldn't find it in my local market, so I went for the slightly higher price point single vineyard Tyrrell's HVD Vineyard Semillon. This is from the 2015 vintage, so it's got about 7 years bottle age on it already, and it's drinking beautifully. So the next variety I've chosen to go into this case that we're squirreling away is Shannon Blanc. Shannon Blanc's an interesting variety. It tends to have high acidity. It is prone to botrytis, not unlike Riesling in a lot of ways. It's not as aromatic. It tends to have honeyed, almost woolly notes. Best examples come from areas like the Loire Valley, so Vouvray. Vouvray, the style is often an off-dry style that has some botrytis influence. Or there is some dry areas, say Sauvignon, the style is a little drier. But the region I've actually chosen is Stellenbosch, so South Africa.
He's not respecting the classics.
Shannon Blanc's been around in South Africa for a long time, since 1655 I believe they brought the first cuttings in. And it's the largest planted variety in South Africa, and I think it's actually the best. I really like Shannon coming out of South Africa. It can be a bit of a workhorse variety, so it can be quite high yielding. Those sort of wines tend to be more generic, But when grapes are grown with low yields, old vines, good sites, the results can be quite spectacular. So the wine I've chosen is the Ken Forrester 2021 Old Vine Reserve Shannon Blanc from Stellenbosch. This comes in at around about $25 Canadian, around 20 US, which is amazing value. This is a cracking wine. This is a very high scoring wine and an absolute bargain. So the next arrow in our quiver is going to be Chardonnay. Chardonnay is extremely widely planted around the world. My favourite examples still come from Burgundy. I really like Chassagne Montrachet, Puligny Montrachet, Meursault, but even those village wines are over $100 in my market. So I think that we can do better in terms of pricing. I do really love the wines that are coming out of, say, Tasmania, Mornington Peninsula, Bellarine Peninsula, Margaret River, Adelaide Hills in Australia. I actually think Australia's Chardonnay is probably its strongest variety at the moment.
Biased. Ha!
So we have some options there. One good option, I would say, is the Xanadu Chardonnay from Margaret River. Pretty reasonable price point in this market, around the $30, $35 Canadian mark. Another really good option for Chardonnay is in the Mâconnais, so just a little bit south of Burgundy. Some of the prices are a little bit more reasonable. So something like a Pouilly-Fuissé, not to be confused with Pouilly-Fumé, which is Sauvignon Blanc from Sancerre. This is Pouilly-Fuissé, so it's another small appellation that really fights above its weight class when it comes to Chardonnay. Chardonnay naturally has high levels of acidity. It's often barrel aged, and it will age extremely well. Ultimately, what I went for was the William Favre Champ Rioja 2019 Chablis.
Jolly good try.
So Chablis is part of Burgundy, but it's a little bit cooler. The wines tend to be slightly more austere. This is around 13% alcohol. They have this kind of dusty mineral quality on the palate. So when they're young, they can be quite firm and austere, but as they develop beautifully, and they're wonderful wines to age. This wine in my market was around about $35 to $40 Canadian. It's around that sort of 25, I think, to 30 US. It's a great wine, and it'll be perfect for your box. So the next wine we've got that I'm going to put in our swag is a Tempranillo based wine. Tempranillo is a variety that ages really well. This particular example comes from Rioja. Rioja is quite a diverse region. Really, it's almost two regions. You've got Rioja Alta, which is the area kind of that abuts the Sierra Cantabria mountain range. And then you have Rioja Baja, which is a flatter area that's dominated more by Garnacha. So the designation that we've got on this particular wine is a reserva level. So that means it has to have been aged for 3 years, of which 1 year is in barrique. They use a lot of American oak barrels in Rioja and a lot of barrel aging with the wines. There is a little bit of a movement towards more French barriques, but traditionally Rioja does have that vanilla, coconut, almost dill quality from the American oak barrels, which some people really love. I find it pretty attractive in older wines as well, and it makes it very distinctive. So this wine we've got is from Muga. It's the 2018 Reserva Rioja. This comes in to my market. It's around $32. I think it ranges from anywhere from say 27 to that 32 range in Canada, and then between say 20 to 25 in US. It's a bargain. Rioja wines generally are great for cellaring, and they're often pre-aged. So this vintage is 2018. We're 4 years in. You can often get wines that are sort of 5, 7, 9 years old, ready to drink, but with the potential for aging more. So yeah, this is a great style for our case.